Welcome to the Big 12 Insiders, your Big 12 sports show. Here's your host, Brien Hanley.
Hey, everybody, what's going on? This is your man, Big B, Brien Hanley. Welcome back to Big 12 Insiders. Appreciate everybody showing up. Today, we are covering what I believe is going to be the game of the week. Texas Tech travels to Arizona, both coming off of pretty impressive victories last week. So we're going to talk to them about the upcoming matchup and what happened in last week's game. Up first, we've got my man, Jarrett Johnson, who covers Texas Tech for 24/7. So we're going to speak to him a little bit. Before we do, remember everybody to like, follow, subscribe, and continue to leave those comments. We absolutely appreciate it. So, Jarrett, first things first, man, how are you doing, my man? It's been a minute.
It has been a minute. Thanks for having me on, Big B. I've been missing our conversations. Yeah, we're in the thick of it. Big 12 plays is finally kicked off, the last couple of weeks. And you and I thought about our conversations all offseason about how close, how competitive these games are going to be. And look, I understand there may not be like a bell cow team, or maybe there is. Maybe Arizona might be. We might talk about that here in a minute. But it's been fun. The games have been a lot of fun to watch, just from a football fan's perspective. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's the thing that we talked about basically all summer, is how competitive we thought the games were going to be. And again, in my perception or in my point of view, I like it that way. I get tired of the blowouts and all that kind of stuff. And don't get me wrong, there's a few bad teams in this conference, but for the most part, the games have been competitive. So having said all of that, let's talk about Tech here for a minute. The season didn't start off great, got off to a little shaky start, but it looks like Tech may have found a little footing here, Jarrett.
Yeah, they got to a 1-1 start, and a lot. I think if you ask Tech fans, they felt like the 52-51 victory over Abilene Christian felt like a loss, and it really did in a lot of ways. Except I remember being there at Jones AT&T Stadium up in the press box, thinking, when ACU lined up for that 2-point conversion to win the game in overtime, like, if Tech loses this, what is this going to mean? And the relief just for Texas Tech fans, my customers, and everybody I cover, I'm not going to pretend like I don't care about them. I was relieved for what it and my own business, to be quite honest, right. what it meant that they got that stop. But that being said, they did not look good in that game. Then they went to Washington State. Taj Brooks didn't play in that game, but the defense looked terrible. And everybody was kind of looking at each other like, where's this team we thought we were going to see all year? And now they've won 3 in a row. The offense is averaging over 40 points a game. The defense is still coming on. But I think the biggest difference is Texas Tech has a better idea of who they are on both sides of the ball, and at least they're playing to those strengths, and it's resulted, at least in Big 12 play, in a couple of close victories.
Well, you mentioned you mentioned about the offense and defense as far as who they are. We know who they are on offense, and I think it's a balanced attack, Jared. Last week couldn't have said it any better. I mean, they threw it, ran it. Again, I don't know how great Cincinnati's defense actually is, but I don't think it's terrible. I just believe that Texas Tech can pretty much do what they want to on offense. But I also think that it's got to be a balanced attack. You can't just constantly run it, and you can't just constantly throw it. I think that's how Barrett Morton is more effective, is when they're doing both. Just like a lot of quarterbacks. He's not any different. Or, you shouldn't hold that against him, I should say, Jared, because he needs a balanced attack. Most quarterbacks do need a balanced attack, and that's what Tech is.
Absolutely. That's it right now. I was talking with one of my writers, Joe Yeager, after the game. We do our day after podcast, and I said, look, if you step back, because there's a high standard of offense at Texas Tech, and there has been for decades now. And so fans are highly critical of the offensive coordinator, quarterback, all that, just every year. That's just how it is. I mean, Mahomes was heavily criticized when he was here, believe it or not. But if you just take a step back, take whatever your fandom, your thoughts about Texas Tech is, and look at Texas Tech's offense, objectively, they're scary. It's a scary offense because, first off, and it all starts with stopping Taj Brooks.
Mm-hmm.
And Texas Tech opens games by running Taj Brooks like 4 or 5 times in a row, and they usually get 2 first downs. They usually score on that first drive. And then after that, it's play action, it's RPO game. And the difference between this season and last year, there's 2 of them. One, Bear Morton's been healthy. They've had a healthy quarterback so far the whole season. And 2, they have receivers that will make you pay if you load up to stop Taj Brooks. If you don't load up, Taj will run over you. I mean, he had 172 yards last week, and despite missing a game this year, he's amongst the leaders in the Big 12 in rushing yards. But then when you do load up to stop him, Josh Kelly, new receiver we talked about in the offseason, I mean, he's having a great season. Caleb Douglas, Coy Aiken is another receiver who is really doing great things. And then Tech has 3 tight ends they like a whole lot who have all made plays this year.
Right. Let me ask you just, I guess this is more of a personal question, Jarrett. Why the hell don't more people talk about Taj Brooks being one of the best backs in the country? Why? And is it just because he plays in Lubbock, or what is it? Because when I watch this kid play, he easily is one of the top backs in the country, and not enough people say that.
I think it's because Tech hasn't played in meaningful games in his career at Texas Tech in terms of like the game determining what happens in the conference. That's something else you and I have talked about a lot, is that if Texas Tech wants to take a step forward, they have, and Coach McGuire said it himself. I asked him about it in press conferences, and he doesn't shy away from that. They have to play in meaningful games in November that the rest, at least the region, see. Like coaches, people who really know what's going on in the Big 12 know, hey, Taj Brooks, he's as good as anybody is out there.
Right.
The guy, he's special. He really is. I guarantee you opposing defensive coordinators know exactly who he is. But I don't think it's some bias. I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think Texas Tech has to play in meaningful games in order for Taj to be recognized beyond, what we just talked about.
Sure. Well, here's the thing, this Saturday is an opportunity here.
Yeah.
Because, you look at the rest of Tech's schedule. I mean, look, there's a lot of football still left to be played. So, and especially in this crazy conference, you don't know what's going to happen. Having said all of that, if things play out, they win on Saturday, Jarrett. They got an opportunity here to play some of those meaningful games in November like you're talking about.
That's exactly what it is an opportunity. Tech handled its business at home, and they've been very good at home under Joey McGuire. They're off to a good start, 4-1, 2-0 in the Big 12. But how do you gain respect in college football?
Yeah.
Winning on the road. Winning on the road against a good opponent. That's why are we thinking about Arizona like, whoa, look what they just did. They went and beat Utah at Utah. That's how you gain respect. Right. And that is, if Texas Tech wants to accomplish things, if Taj Brooks wants, I know he cares about team goals more than individual accolades, but if all these things want to come true, they got to start beating good teams on the road. And here's an opportunity. And, there's adversity. We haven't even talked about Tech's defense yet, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that Texas Tech would go and beat Arizona. I think they opened as 5-point underdogs, which that's not even Vegas sees it as Tech has a puncher's chance. And while, Arizona is coming off, an emotional victory. So does that help Texas Tech in terms of having played on the road? They come back home. There's also an unusual start time, maybe not for Arizona, but for Texas Tech, I believe 10 o'clock Central Time. That's late, man. I'm a night owl, so it doesn't bother me. But I know a lot of people, they don't roll like that. They don't stay up that late, even on a Saturday night. When talking about a game that's going to go after midnight, obviously, and all that. So, but going back to your question, no, it is a tremendous opportunity. It really is.
So, let's get into the Tech defense. Hasn't been great all year. Secondary's kind of banged up. Arizona presents a lot of challenges to any defense, much less a banged up secondary. But here's the thing, though, Jarrett. They didn't really do that. Now, they made the 2 clutch plays. Fafita made those crazy 2 3rd and 11s, to end the game against Utah on that last drive, which was insane. But they physically kind of ran over Utah and whipped them up front. where do you start when you try to stop this team if you're Tech?
Well, I think you have to stop the run. And what's weird is that other than Washington State now, and we have to mention that, and that was their quarterback who did most of the damage. Texas Tech's actually been pretty good against the run. Arizona State came in as like a top 10, top 12 rushing team, and actually they were really good at stopping the run, and Tech beat them in the trenches, which I didn't know they could do that against Arizona State. Last week, now Cincinnati, the running backs got beat up in the game, but I mean, that's a part of the game. You know, Tech's secondary was beat up, and nobody's making a lot of excuses for that. I mean, Tech lost their first three free safeties. They were down to a walk-on free safety who got hurt, and then they had to put in the backup sophomore. Had never started a game on the fly. So that's part of it. And Tech stopped Cincinnati's running game. Now they got torched in the passing game, and that's where I see the problem. I don't see many people matching up with McMillan or Fafita. I certainly don't see Texas Tech's secondary. I don't know how they're going to do it, to be honest. And I think hearing McGuire talk about it yesterday, he had that same expression. I don't know if he was just overplaying that fact,
right.
But they're young, they're beat up, not just in the secondary, but one of the big strengths coming into the season was the depth at outside linebacker. They lost two of their top outside linebackers, guys I thought were going to start before the season started. More guys have gone down. They've lost something like 4 outside linebackers at different times. And then, like I said, free safety, their top corners missed most of their games. Braylon Lux, there's hope that he'll be back this week, but they're very young in a lot of places. The coverage hasn't been really close in a lot of these games. It's definitely been a bend but don't break kind of philosophy, and they're not generating pressure. And I asked McGuire on Monday, head coach Joey McGuire, that, is it the fact that the secondary just is performing so poor and the coverage is so bad and that's why you're not getting home, or is it the pass rush, or is it both in terms of not generating sacks? And he said it was both. Just so that's the honest truth, is they're going to have to take a big leap. Now, on the other hand, one thing they've been good at is forcing turnovers. They got a pick 6 of Brendan Sorsby, who hadn't thrown an interception all season. That was a big point of the game. Ben Roberts is the inside linebacker who's performing at a high level right now. He had like 12 tackles, a couple of tackles for loss, a forced fumble, and he provided the quarterback pressure on that pick 6. So he's going to be asked to do a lot coming up this week against Arizona, just like he is every week. But that is the one positive, and it's a big deal. I mean, forcing turnovers is a big deal. So if they can continue to do that, I mean, if they do that this week, that will go a long way, obviously, towards them having a chance against Arizona.
Right. I mean, forcing turnovers can alleviate some of your issues that you may have on defense if you can still create those turnovers. Looking at this again from the outside looking in, it seems to be the recipe, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but the recipe for them to be able to win this game. And obviously there's several ways that they can win, but the main way is keep the ball away from Arizona. Now, I get that Arizona was tough against the run last week, but they couldn't really throw it that well. So I think it's Tech, you run the ball, you play ball control, you win the time of possession, definitely win the turnover battle. And if you do that, I think they got an opportunity to come away with the win, Jared.
Yeah, it's going to have to be what you said. Again, I think the recipe's there. They know the script. You start off with Taj, you make them stop Taj or load up. Like, just say, hey, you're going to have to beat us through the air. And Barron has shown he's been able to do that. 14 touchdowns, I believe, just 2 interceptions, putting up big numbers. He's been very efficient, like I was alluding to. A lot of different receivers. You can't just say, okay, we're going to stop the running game with Taj and then load up against Josh Kelly, because then Cole Aiken had 2 touchdowns last week. He should have had 3 touchdowns last week. Caleb Douglas is another really good threat. They have a couple of tight ends, Jalen Conyers, who used to play at Arizona State, so is very familiar with Arizona, who has scored and been effective in a variety of ways. So the offense is not a problem. And in terms of controlling the clock, they have slowed tempo way down. They still go tempo sometimes, but they're like, okay, this is what we are. We have a very balanced offense. it's a very good offense. If we get an early lead, that's what Tech is saying, and then play bend but don't break. Get some stops in the red zone, force some field goals, and then win the turnover battle. Then Texas Tech feels like they have a good chance to win, and that's the recipe again this week against Arizona.
Yeah. First of all, I think it's going to be a great football game. I really do. I think, like I said, Tech started off not a little shaky. They started off pretty shaky to start the season, but it looks like they found their footing. Again, a lot of football left to be played, which is a good thing for us because, I know you love football and I love football. I looked up and I'm like, 7 weeks left. I'm like, oh, my goodness, what is going on here? So, but I think it's going to be a great football game. I got to put you on the spot, Jarrett. Who wins on Saturday?
I want to say Texas Tech because, again, they've won 3 in a row. They're playing at a high level. They figured out their formula, but they haven't proven to me that they can win on the road against good teams. And I hope they prove me wrong. I think it's going to be close. I think Tech will have an opportunity, but until they show that they can play consistently well on the road, then it's hard for me to pick them. So I think Arizona's going to be able to put up some points. I think it'll be something like 38-35 or 38-31 Arizona. It may even be in the 40s, but I think Arizona does enough to edge Texas Tech this week.
Gotcha. Well, Jarrett, man, I want to thank you again for giving us your time today, man. We appreciate it, and we will have you back. As always, and I'll have you back as much as we possibly can, man. So we appreciate you joining us today.
Anytime, Big B. I really appreciate you having me on, man.
No problem. We will be right back with Jason Scheer from Arizona right after this quick break.
Welcome back to the show. Let's head back to the studio.
All right, we got Jason Scheer here coming in to talk about Arizona. He covers the Arizona Wildcats for 24/7 Sports. First off, Jason, how are you doing today, my man?
Doing well. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you. No problem. Thanks for taking the time to come on. Look, after basically Arizona, after that Kansas State game, a lot of people just said, you know what? Let's write off Arizona. They're not physical. They're not serious. And it looks like Arizona took that bye week and just took it to heart to remind people kind of what they were and say, hold on a second now. That was one game. Maybe that was just a fluke game. We're going to go to Utah and be physical with them. And they did, Jason. They physically whipped Utah on Saturday.
Yeah, I think that bye week was huge. From what I understand, talking to people within the program, the tone of the coaching staff changed, the tone of the players changed. Arizona made a change at offensive coordinator, basically. And so everything kind of came to a head saying, look, if we want to be the team that we were last year, things need to change. And then they go to Utah, and it's just a completely different team than we saw against Kansas State. They beat Utah up on the lines, which is almost impossible to do over the years. They were more physical than Utah, and it was just a really, really impressive game for Arizona.
Let me dive into kind of what you mentioned. And a lot of people, this went just under the radar, making a change at offensive coordinator, Jason. Look, I respect that more than anything because it sounds like what I always talk about is people, it's one thing to make a mistake. It's another thing to live in the mistake. And it kind of sounds like, this is a first-year head coach at Arizona anyway, saying this is not going the way that I want it to go. We need to make a change. I commend him for doing that, man, because you don't see that a lot of times.
Yeah, Arizona has Noah Fafita and Tetaroa and McMillan, who are two of the best players in the country at their position, and the offense could have moved the ball. Even against NAU, an FCS team, only scored 23 points, couldn't move the ball. And so what they did is, Dina Babers was the offensive coordinator. Matt Atkins was the pass game coordinator, but Babers was calling the plays during games. And so what they did is they kind of switched that around. Atkins is now creating the offensive game plan and calling plays. And, while the offense wasn't perfect against Utah, it certainly looked different. It was certainly more successful than it had been since the season opener. And you're right. I give Brendan a ton of credit. That's not an easy decision to make, especially after 3 games. But I think that also shows the community and the team that, this guy's in it to win it. Like, he's not messing around. He realizes that there's high expectations this season, and he made that move in order to make sure that Arizona has a good chance of reaching those expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the things is, like I mentioned before, people writing off Arizona, after the Kansas State game. Number one, it was not a conference game. Although in the conference, not a conference game. So they're still undefeated in the conference. But two, I guess more so, speak about the confidence after winning this game, how much that did for not only the coaches, but the guys in the locker room.
Yeah, I think it's much easier. Brent Brennan has a message. He's been very clear with the message. But if you're a player, you kind of want to see it work, right? And so now that they, after Kansas State, maybe there's a little doubt creeping into your mind. But then you go and beat Utah, and it's like, okay, now I get the message, right? And I think for Brennan, it's easier. And like you mentioned, Utah had won 33 of their last 35 games at home. You don't go into Utah on a Saturday night and beat Utah. And you don't do it the way that Arizona did it. So now you look at the schedule, and you don't have a harder game than at Utah. And I'm not saying Arizona's going to go undefeated for the rest of the year or anything like that. I'm just saying that, it's always going to go back to, look, guys, we beat Utah at Utah. None of these games will be harder than that. And 5 of their next games are at home. And you got to think that, if you're Arizona, the confidence has to be up that you have the ability to go on the road and beat those teams, and really no team should intimidate you now.
Right. You're talking about the offense and the changes that they made, and everybody talks about Fafita and McMillan, and they should. I mean, those are, like you mentioned, some of the best players in the country. But they ran the football against Utah, which I think a lot of people are surprised, without Krusky Merritt, which I don't know if he's ever going to come back or not. It sounds like maybe, I have no idea. You probably have a better idea. But they were able to still run the football and control the line of scrimmage. How big is that for this offense?
Yeah, first off, I would be surprised if Jacory plays again. The NCAA hasn't given an answer, and at this point, I just don't trust them to give Arizona an answer in time. So I've taken the approach, the coaching staff has taken the approach that it would be a pleasant surprise if he plays again. Arizona has started a different offensive line in every game this season. All 4 games, they've had a different offensive line. And finally, during the bye week, they promoted Alexander Deuce, a Northwestern transfer, to guard. And this was the best the offensive line has played all year. And it for the first time, they're going to start this same offensive line next game. And it looks like they found their starting offensive line. And, even when Babers was the offensive coordinator and calling plays, he said, look, this offense is going to get better once we have a solidified offensive line. And I think they have it. And that goes a long way. I mean, they had games where they were playing guys out of position because of injuries and kind of moving parts around. And it's tough to do on the offensive line. And so to me, that was probably the most surprising part of the Utah game is, Utah was averaging 3 sacks a game, didn't have any against Arizona. And the offensive line and the defensive line dominated Utah's lines, which just it doesn't happen.
Right. Well, and you mentioned the defensive line. We've talked a lot about the offense. Talk about how good this defense was. It wasn't great against Kansas State, and maybe even earlier in the season, looked really good against Utah. Tell us about maybe some changes or what they did to kind of stymie them.
It just came down to making plays and doing their job. They didn't do anything crazy. There was a few changes here and there. Personnel-wise, some guys on the defensive line got a few more snaps than they usually do. But basically, Arizona went man-to-man and believed that their corners could guard Utah's receivers, especially with Isaac Wilson at quarterback. And it worked. And what that did is that it freed up the linebackers and the defensive line to do their job, and they were just aggressive. And again, there's a few more players. Kevon Dartha, the Syracuse interior defensive lineman who put up really good number at Syracuse. He's finally healthy. He played a little bit more. Isaiah Johnson, who's really strong, played more last game than he probably has all season. They kind of gave some guys a few more snaps, but at the end of the day, it came down to man-to-man coverage. I mean, Takario Davis was a Big 12 defensive player in the week, had 5 pass breakups. Right. Emmanuel Carnley, first career start because their other starting corner was injured. Carnley played fantastic. It really wasn't anything wild. It was just guys finally doing their job.
Gotcha. you're facing another physical running team this week in Texas Tech. Now, they can move the ball both offensively and defensively, or not offensive deep, but through the air and on the ground. So another tough challenge, but you get this one at home. Tell us a little bit on some of the ways that Arizona needs to try to stop this Texas Tech offense.
Yeah, from what I've seen, I think Texas Tech's offense, when it's operating and clicking, it is good. I mean, It is really good. And what makes them unique is, a lot of people automatically think air raid because they like to throw the ball, but Taj Brooks is really good, and they'll give them 40 carries if they have to. It's another interesting game with the secondary. I think Arizona has to find a way to limit Taj Brooks. That offense changes. What they like to do is kind of open things up with him, and if they could slow down Brooks, I think their secondary is good enough to contain Texas Tech. Texas Tech is a different team on the road, but the quarterback gets it out quick. It's hard to get to him because of that. To me, I think it's all going to start with containing Brooks and then kind of going from there.
Gotcha. Well, I look forward to it. I think obviously it's the best matchup of the weekend inside the Big 12. It looks like Arizona might be back on track. Like I said, a lot of people just wrote Arizona off after the Kansas State game, the way that they looked, but there's nothing better to get your team back and people talking about you again by going on the road against a team that everybody thinks is very good and is very good, and physically whipping them. Had to be good for the confidence. I'll put you on the spot, Jason. Who wins this game Saturday?
I like Arizona because it's at Arizona mostly. And like you mentioned, like if Arizona loses this game, people are just going to look at the Utah game as a fluke, right? It's an upset. But if Arizona beats Texas Tech, who's a very solid team, I think Arizona will, be recognized as, okay, this team is good enough to compete to win the conference. I expect a really good game. I think it's going to be a close game. I have a lot of respect for Texas Tech. I just like Arizona at home, and I think Texas Tech's defense is going to really struggle on the road.
Yeah, Tech's defense hasn't been great all year, and going on the road against everything that Arizona brings to the table, it's going to be tough, but I'm looking forward to it. So thank you, number one, again, for giving us your time, and thank everybody else for joining us today on Big 12 Insiders. Remember to like, follow, subscribe, and continue to leave those comments. We appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Big 12 Insiders, your Big 12 sports show. This has been a Spirit Street production.